And I said, that's great. I said, well, where's your wife? Because usually it's the husband and wife that I take the picture with. And he says, well, let me tell you something funny. My wife is actually one of the protesters outside.
As we meet the challenges of today, America's begun to look ahead to the next generation of leaders. Helping lead that charge is today's guest, Vivek Ramaswamy, the biotech and business pioneer who ran for president, and today is the leading Republican contender for governor of Ohio. His message is simple. If we strive for excellence, there's nothing we cannot do. From Ballard Studios in Washington, D.C., it's 13th and Park.
The hard things that are necessary, we either do it or we'll pay the price down the road.
That often is missing in politics.
We have to solve everything.
It's a nightmare.
You and I can differ, but that doesn't mean you and I cannot be friends.
I have faith in the American people.
Those are the facts.
The Illuminati, right there. Aliens could have invaded and nothing would surprise me at this point.
We went from North Korea to M&M. That's a lot, man.
What's in this tea?
So great to have you with us today in studio. This is kind of a thrill. I've seen you so many times on television. This is kind of cool.
I like in person. It's great to not have TV screens in between two people having a conversation.
Okay, so let's go back before we go forward. So,
Okay.
You're a success in biotech, in business, and finance. You then run for president of the United States, and now on to the next quest in running for governor of Ohio. In the presidential campaign, what did you learn from that? I mean, take away certain things maybe you didn't expect.
I mean, a million things. I mean, in terms of lessons about politics and the conduct of politics, lesson of how to spend your time. I have lessons in every one of those domains. But I think the more deep lesson that I took away about the future direction of the country is that we're sold this myth of national division, that we're deeply divided as a people. I began my presidential campaign with that premise as well. We traveled to a lot of places where traditional Republicans don't go. We went to college campuses. We went to the inner city of Chicago. We went to Kensington in the inner city of Philadelphia, a lot of non-traditional places, which maybe one lesson is I should have better followed the advice of my advisors who told me I was wasting my time in a lot of those places because I obviously did not prevail in the race. We did far better than anyone expected.
Absolutely.
But one of the things I learned is that we are not nearly as divided as the media would have you believe. I think most people in this country actually share the same foundational values in common. Not all people, but most people. Right. And not all policies, but the values. I think most people share the same foundational values in our country. And to me, that's encouraging.
Well, you came into that race, though, not as an uber partisan. You were the outsider from the next generation, kind of moving into this for the first time. And even in what you're talking about these days, it's all about us. It's not about one party versus another. It's not about one generation versus another. You're always seeking. I can see the wheels turning with you. Common ground.
Yeah, I mean, and not for the sake of compromising on principles. Right. I mean, I'm a proud conservative. I'm a proud Republican. But I also believe in independent thought.
Right.
And if you think independently about some of the questions that haven't yet been, the subject of partisan tug of war, I think we're going to see a lot more of these questions in the next 10 years. Yeah. What do we think about AI? What do we think about the future of nuclear energy in the United States? What does bringing manufacturing back mean in an era of automation, in an era of advanced manufacturing? Mm-hmm. These are questions that are going to be foundational to the future of the United States, which frankly don't fall on a Republican or Democrat axis. And so I am somebody who, yes, I'm a constitutional conservative. I stand by that in a steadfast way. But I also believe in thinking independently about new problems. In some ways, that's one of the areas where we're able to build bridges, is when we go outside of the usual tug-of-war topics, we're able to actually build, I wouldn't say even just common ground as it is common inquiry. Think about what the future of AI policy is. That's not a Democrat or Republican topic. But the principles that guide you there can then bring you back to a discussion about regulation or about the growth of the administrative state or bureaucracy that you're able to then back into from the future rather than from the division of the past. And so that's the way I like to, engage maybe those who disagree with us, is you go to new terrain. You start with shared principles, and then you apply them even to the subject where you thought you disagreed.
Right.
And something funny often happens where you're able to find maybe more commonality than you might have started with if you just entered into the, debates of yesterday on tax policy or regulation.
You said there's a big difference between diversity and difference of opinion. And then you went further, talking about freedom. Freedom is the ability to say what you believe.
Yeah.
without worrying about being dissed and dismissed. That
Yes.
is the ultimate test of freedom. How do we get there?
You got to be free to express your opinion in the open without the government standing in your way. That doesn't mean your speech does not have personal consequences to you. In private life, people may judge you differently if you have a particular opinion. That's their freedom to be able to associate with you or not. But you shouldn't have the government standing in the way. Now, that's the First Amendment. But the First Amendment culture, I think, goes beyond that. It also says that the way we get to truth is actually through deliberation and free speech and open debate. That part of our culture and character as a country is that you could disagree like hell and still get together at the dinner table at the end of it.
Right.
That was the Ohio that I grew up into in the late 80s, in the 90s, even the early 2000s. I think there was something in the culture of the country, certainly in the culture of my home state, where that was true. And we lost some sense of that. I think it's the algorithmification of our dialogue that created these,
So unpack
these silos.
that. What does that mean, algorithm?
Yeah, I mean, I think it started with the advent of cable news that was divided on a partisan basis. So you start getting your own information through the prism that you already agree with.
Right.
Now, that wasn't algorithmified. But then with the modern advent of social media, it takes that and actually looks at what you're able to click on 1 microsecond quicker than something else and feeds you more of the same. Then what you have is originally you're supposed to have social media imitating the real world. What ended up happening is the real world started imitating social media. And then you have an artifice of a kind of division that didn't exist 30 years ago. To say that you're part of a different tribe if you have a different set of framework for looking at policy issues. And that's sort of a bizarre, un-American view of the world, actually. One of the things I've seen is that if you allow people, give people a space to just scratch beneath that surface a little bit, that common bond of not agreeing on everything, but at least respecting our dignity as fellow citizens still exists.
Doesn't that feel good, though, when you have a conversation with someone, you disagree on some point of view, but yet you walk away from the table kind of feeling good? You've learned something. They've
I
learned
love
something.
that. I'm into that. There's a funny story. So I was in Northwest Ohio maybe 3 weeks ago. And we've seen a trend of this where, we have some of the biggest crowds that have come out for these Republican Lincoln Day dinners in the history of the state. A lot of energy on one hand. On the other hand, when I show up at these events, we're also seeing a lot of protesters at these events. And I celebrate that. I think that's great as long as you're peaceful, as long as you're doing it in a lawful manner. Whenever possible, I try to go out and actually talk to the protesters as well. So I talk to some of the protesters. Then I go inside. There's a giant photo line. People are waiting for, an hour. The guy towards the end of the line, after a full hour of me, looking into the flash and smiling, this guy comes up.
There we go.
And he tells me about his son. And his son's coming to the event later on in the evening. And I said, that's great. I said, well, where's your wife? Because usually it's the husband and wife that I take the picture with. And he says, well, let me tell you something funny. My wife is actually one of the protesters outside. So he has me signing a picture for him, taking a photograph in the photo line, and then his wife's a protester outside. That's kind of funny. It's you take a step back and laugh, right? They're going to disagree, but still get together at the dinner table, presumably.
Isn't that America?
That's America.
Yeah, that's
right?
good. That's a good thing.
So the other
Right.
day, so that was about 3 weeks ago.
Right.
The other day at a different event, this is Wayne County, Ohio, where, again, I go out and talk to these protesters. So there's a woman, she's in her 70s, it looks like,
Right.
but she's really vehement. She's really upset. And she says, why are you going to cut veterans' benefits? I said, well, I'm not going to cut veterans' benefits. I don't know where you're getting that. She said, no, you're cutting veterans' benefits. Where'd you get that? I said, I'm not cutting veterans' benefits, but I want to know where you heard that. So she thought about it. She said, I'm not sure, but I heard it somewhere. I feel like I read it somewhere. I said, well, I'm here to tell you that that's not part of my platform. It would actually be a somewhat silly platform to run on for governor of Ohio. Why would someone want to run for governor of Ohio and be
all the veterans in Ohio?
Benefits?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. But I started talking to her because if that's her concern, I suspect that she's a veteran. I said, have you served the country? And she said, yes, I have.
Wow.
I'm a Vietnam veteran. I said, well, come in and have dinner with us tonight. So she came into this Lincoln Reagan Day dinner. I see her, watch her throughout the event. She's mingling a little bit. I see her at the head table with me. She's quietly listening. She's not talking much, but she's quietly listening. Then when I'm on stage, I'm watching her. 'Cause there's maybe 700 people in the audience, but I'm watching her mannerism. There's applause lines where she might agree with it, but she's kind of reluctant to applaud because maybe she feels like she's betraying the protesters that she came with. So at the end of it, I had her stand up and had told the audience that we had a Vietnam-era veteran, a woman in the room, who we're going to recognize. The audience applauded for her. And we brought her up on stage.
Wow.
And the thing that she said, I asked her to say a few words. She didn't say much, but she said, well, listen, I think you've changed my perspective on Republicans tonight. She said, I still don't like Trump, okay? And everyone in the room actually laughed because everyone in the room
She
loves
made the
Trump.
disclaimers, right?
Yeah, but she was laughing about it too.
Right.
But it kind of brought out a different side where we were able to have some humor and disagree about it while the way we started that evening was with her at a serious, this is the opposition and people who must be stopped at all cost, to just changing the perspective a little bit. And I think it goes in all directions.
Well, let's talk about two things specifically as you seek the gubernatorial nod in Ohio, right?
Sure.
Two things that really stand out. One is you want to make Ohio a zero tax state. I come from Florida.
Yes.
So I get it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Don't take too many Floridians with you, okay?
But
I
you're taking a lot of
understand
Ohioans.
it. Right
and
now,
I respect
right?
that. I respect that because I want a zero income tax and immediately what we're going to go to is zero capital gains tax
good.
in Ohio. I think we're going to be able to get to that very quickly. And that brings capital and capital owners into our state, which then has a virtuous cycle that then kicks off.
Now let's get into education. We can't get ahead, right? Unless we really help the next generation, give them the tools to compete. And I like to think, having read into your story, that there are a lot of people that you would credit for your passion for this, not just your wife and your family. It's some of your teachers.
Absolutely.
It's Mrs. Hendel.
Yes.
Mrs. Stallworth.
You've been really paying attention to this.
Mrs.
Thank
Kinney.
you. Miss Kinney.
God rest her soul.
And
So-
Miss Kinney in particular, I want to recognize because she's somebody who, she was in 6th grade.
Yeah.
I switched into different public school, Robert E. Lucas Intermediate School, RELIS is what they called it. And sadly, this part of what's going on, that school no longer exists. It had a magnet program.
Yeah.
But she changed my life because she saw potential in me that
There you go.
I didn't know I had.
Yeah.
And she was the kind of teacher at the beginning of the school year where I was kind of scared of her. I was a little nervous, right?
Right.
She was hard. She was somebody who pushed me to achieve what I didn't know I had in me, but she saw in me anyway. And we need more teachers like Mrs. Kinney. And we're not going to attract the best in the next generation if a teacher can't live the American dream. And a public school teacher right now on a $40,000 a year starting salary,
Can't make
I don't think can live the
Right.
full American dream in the sense that you and I use that word. And the American dream is not just about green pieces of paper. It's about so much more than that. But there's some minimal level of financial attainment that you have to be able to achieve for yourself and your family to live the American dream too. So I want the best public school teachers in Ohio and hopefully as a model for the country to be paid more than they are now. But it's got to be tied in some way to performance.
That's it.
I mean, you run a company. I've
Yep.
run companies.
Yeah.
You cannot run a company without a performance management
Yep.
system.
Yep.
That would be insane.
Yep.
And yet that's the way we run our public schools today.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about this, right? These aren't just ideas in a bubble, but I want to test my theory. Turns out there's one school in Ohio that's actually already been doing this. It's a vocational school
Okay.
for 9th through 12th grade.
Mhm.
But they changed about 10 years ago to paying teachers based on performance, including outcomes like retention rate, graduation rate of the students in their classroom, employment placement rate, because it's a vocational school, and then even tracking the pay of those students. Before and after they adopted merit-based bonuses for their teachers, night and day difference.
Wow.
And it's even better for many of the teachers. So if you think about this, not just for the students, many of the best teachers are then able to do much better for themselves. In some corridors, these are controversial ideas. But I do think that the status quo is not working.
We know that.
The status
We see
quo is
it.
unacceptable.
It's all around us.
And that is the end of American exceptionalism. If we go another generation where our 7th grade students are at Chinese 3rd grade student levels or Singapore's 2nd grade student levels, because Singapore is even further ahead, that is the end of American leadership as we know it. And I think there's two decisive issues we're going to have to address for the next generation. One is the national debt, which is only growing with the uncontrolled nature of federal spending in the entitlement state. That's an issue for Washington, D.C.
Right.
And I have my views on that, and we could talk about it. But the other issue is the educational achievement crisis. And that one isn't going to be Washington, D.C. It's going to have to be the states.
It's local.
And if we nail those two issues, I believe this country's best days continue to remain ahead. But it's not going to happen automatically. It's going to take federal leaders here to address the national debt and spending issues. And I think it's going to take leaders at the state level. And what I'm hoping to do in Ohio is to at once lift Ohio up, but also in that process to set a national standard
Right.
that the rest of the states can also borrow from and aspire to, like Florida has done in so many other domains. Well, I want to return the favor, right? We're going to take the zero income taxation from Texas and Florida and Tennessee.
Right.
I have no problem
Right.
taking the best ideas from somewhere else and incorporating them in Ohio. There's no need for pride of authorship. But there will be certain areas where we want to return the favor, where Ohio is now going to lead the country, and it'll be Texas and Florida and Tennessee following our lead rather than the other way around.
People that know you best, starting with your wife. I've watched a number of interviews with your wife going back to the presidential campaign, and they all say the same thing about you. He looks at something, he thinks it through, and then he's full force. Let's go get him, right? Do we need more of that? Do we need more of that kind of leadership? That's not just cerebral, and it's not just leadership of good intention. It's leadership of action.
I think in certainly executive roles at the highest levels in this country, we do. I think we need an energetic executive at the level of a president. I think you need an energetic executive at the level of a governor and mayors of cities across the board. I think being a congressman's a little bit different. I mean, that's a different type of sausage making that's important,
Right.
but it's a different type of skill set, or a senator even. I think there's room for different kinds of leaders. But when you're thinking about who's going to lead the country, who's going to lead a state, and even who's going to lead a city or a township, right now we need people of action.
Yeah.
Right? People who are guided by principle. You don't want to just be going through the motions, because otherwise 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But you got to be guided by principle, guided by North Star, but not just pontificating about it, and not just going on television and cursing the darkness either. That's easy. It's harder to lead our way out of it. And I do think that now is a moment for our conservative movement, our Republican Party, to not just ask what the Biden-Kamala mess is that we were running from.
Yeah.
What are we running to? What is our vision for the future of this country? America needs a vision now more than ever, right? We know what we're against. We know what we won. We won in November. But at this point, be frank, we control both chambers of Congress, the presidency, a 6-3 majority on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yep.
In my home state of Ohio, it's 3-branch control for Republicans, governor, both chambers of the legislature, and a 6-1 majority, probably soon to be 7-0 on the Ohio Supreme Court. If we don't get it right now, we have nobody to blame but ourselves.
That's it.
Right? It's not Biden, Kamala. I mean, we could talk about that till we're blue in the face. 6 months from now, if we're talking about Biden and Kamala, it means we lost the plot. So it's time for us to focus on what are we running to, chase the future instead of the past. And I believe that if we embrace the time-tested principles that made this country great, capitalism as the greatest system to lift people up from poverty, free speech and open debate to revive our civic culture, meritocracy, may the best person get the job regardless of their skin color or their genetics.
Yeah.
If we embrace the time-tested principles that made America great the first time, that's how we're not only going to make America great again, because 4 years from now, I don't want to be saying make America great again.
Right.
I just want to see make America greater than we've ever been. Keep making America greater than we've been. That's where we're headed.
So I couldn't close this interview without letting the audience know about things they probably don't know.
Okay.
You were at Harvard, and you were described as a libertarian rapper. I mean, I wish I'd seen you in performance, right?
I'm glad you did.
And then, of course, you were a nationally ranked, tennis player earlier in life, and it described when you met Andre Agassi, one of your idols, right? 8 Grand Slams. I mean, just try to let that sink in.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing guy who's had an amazing life and a lot of challenges too. He's had to go through a lot. He gave you some philosophical advice. Yeah. And I think you really took that to heart. He said, the longest distance between 2 points is that between your mind and your heart. Bend the former to meet the latter. Does that still drive you today?
It does. And I think it's easier said than done, right? Because we're so guided at times, especially in modern life, to bend your heart to meet your mind. And I think it's the other way around, right? You're guided by your purpose. Then you use the gifts that you're given to realize that true purpose.
Right.
And I just think every one of us, we have this innate desire to be a hero in the short time that we're given. Right? You and I were talking about this even before the show got started, but we all share our mortality in common. I don't take tomorrow for granted. Every day is a gift, and we're grateful for that blessing of that gift. But it gives us that sense of purpose to achieve the most we can in the short time that we're given. Leave our mark on this place in the short time that God's given us. And there's many ways to be a hero. It's not just as a governor or a president or a CEO. You could be a hero as a mother of children, a father of kids. You could be a hero as a nurse or a cop or a teacher.
There you go.
For that matter. But what I would advise every young person, right, or my kids, is I would take that advice from Andre Agassi to heart. Find your heart and where it leads you, bend your mind accordingly. That's the human experience, man. That's what it's all about. And he was somebody who clearly had Grand Slams to show for it, but that doesn't mean you're going to have Grand Slams or be world famous.
Right.
It means you're just going to do what gives you your fulfillment through using your gifts the best you can. And it's probably the best advice I could give to my kids and to other kids across this country.
Well, Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you for spending your time with us today. Godspeed in everything you do. One thing that's clear, you have a kinetic energy. I can just feel this sitting next to you, sitting across from you, and we need more of that. Believe in what you believe, share that with the world, and then, as your wife and so many others say, go for it.
I love it.
Okay. Take care of yourself.
Thank you for having me, man.